On the pasuk here, Adam Eitz HaSodeh, the Gemara asks, V'chi Adam Eitz HaSodeh, is a person, in fact, a tree in the field? And the Gemara answers by contrasting two psukim. In one pasuk it says, Kimi menu soichal v'oisei leisichros, you should eat from the tree and don't cut it down. Another pasuk says, Oisei sashchiz v'charoto, you should cut down the tree. Hakeitzatz, how do these two psukim come together? The Gemara explains, Im Talmud Chacham Hagonu, if he's a Talmud Chacham with proper character, then mimenu toichel, you should eat from him, which Rashi explains, which means that you should learn from him. And v'oisei loisichroi, so that kind of tree, or that kind of Talmud Chacham, you don't cut down, in other words, you stay with him. On the other hand, if he's not that type of Talmud Chacham, then oisei sashchis, which as Rashi explains means stay away from him. And that's the way the Gemara is explaining, Ki Adam Eitz HaSodeh. So the Rebbe asks, we need to understand, from the fact that the Gemara asks, V'chi Adam Eitz Sodehu, it seems quite clear that the Gemara accepts, the Gemara believes, that when the pasuk is comparing the person to the tree in the field, it's not only that the tree in the field is some sort of mushal from which you can understand certain aspects, one or a few aspects of the qualities and characteristics of the person, because if the pasuk was coming just to compare the person in certain details to the tree, then the Gemara wouldn't be asking, is the person a tree of the field? It should be quite obvious that yes, in certain aspects, in certain details, we could find certain comparisons between a person and a tree. Rather, it seems like the Gemara is understanding that Adam Eitz HaSodeh means that the tree is expressing not only a certain aspect or certain details of the person, but rather that the whole idea of the person is about being an Eitz HaSodeh, is being like a tree. The Rebbe says this would also explain to us, and we can understand this also from the idea that we know that we don't say Tachnun on the 15th day of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Li'ilonos. We know it's also a minig Yisrael to eat fruits of the tree on this particular day, and so on. And we connected with this pasuk of Ki Adam Eitz HaSodeh. If in fact Eitz HaSodeh was only some sort of mushal, just in some way the person is similar to a tree, then that wouldn't be a sufficient reason that we should be celebrating the Rosh Hashanah of the trees. That itself tells us that Adam Eitz HaSodeh means that a person is mamish like the tree in the field. And that's why the Rosh Hashanah of the tree has very much a connection to the person. But, says the Rebbe, if that's the case, then it's not understood. First of all, then how did the Gemara answer the question? The Gemara says, is a person a tree in the field? So how is it answered by saying that if he's a Talmud Chacham with proper character, then you should eat from him, you should learn from him, etc.? Because seemingly, even right now, even if that's the answer, it's still only a mashal and a nimshal. We're still only comparing in some way the person to the tree. And furthermore, it's only a one specific aspect, a one specific detail, and therefore the question would seemingly still be in its original place. Is that a reason to call a person Eitz HaSodeh? Another point, says the Rebbe, how is it b'chalal? How is it fitting generally to describe the quality of the human being, the mina medaber, the person, to describe him as Eitz HaSodeh, as the tree of the field, when this is the characteristics of the tzaymeach? We know there's doimim, the inanimate, the tzaymeach, the plant life, the chai, the animals. Medaber is the highest form of the creatures. How are we comparing the medaber to the tzaymeach? Says the Rebbe, although of course it's true that the person also has within him the tzaymeach element. In other words, there's the idea that the person grows, and especially we have in a more noticeable way, we have his hair growing and his nails growing, etc. But, says the Rebbe, if that's the case, then the person has even a greater maila, that he is the idea of chai. In other words, the fact that he's alive, more than just a plant. But chai is a higher form of life than the tzaymeach, that which the animals have. So a person has even that, and he has even greater than that. The Rebbe says, more importantly, that's not the quality of the medaber. That's not the special quality of the person. These are the forms of the lower forms of life. So how is it possible to say, and how does it make sense to say that ha'adam Eitz HaSodeh? Says the Rebbe, the special quality, the special uniqueness of minat tzaymeach, of the plant life, compared to medaber and chai, compared to the person and the animals, consists in the fact that the tzomeach specifically is always connected through its roots to its source. It's never blocking, it's never hiding the fact that it's connected to its source of chayas. You know, it's always noticeable what its life force is, what's giving it life, what's causing it to grow. When you remove the plant from the ground, then it's no longer tzomeach, it's no longer something that grows. The Rebbe says, by chai and medaber, by animals and by human beings, we don't find this idea that they should always be connected to their root, to their source. First of all, the Rebbe says they're not connected to the ground. We know that generally everything comes, it says, hakoil hoya min ha'afar. So even the animals and people originally, the Eibishter makes everything from the earth, so animals and people, we don't see that they're connected to the earth. Another point, says the Rebbe, each and every one of the chai and medaber, whether it's an animal or a person, once they are created or once they're born, they're no longer connected to the source from where they were born. They're no longer connected to their mothers. Also says the Rebbe, the way the chai and medaber, animals and people, the way they are sustained, the way they are nourished, the way they eat, is also not in a way that the food that they are eating doesn't remain connected to its source from where it's coming from. Only, says the Rebbe, tzomeach, only the plant life, only the things that grow, these are the ones that are constantly connected to the koyach hatzomeach, to that energy that's making things grow that's in the ground. The Rebbe says it is true that we find something similar to this by fish, that they are always in their source of life, which is the water. And we know that the moment that they leave the water, they die. And the Rebbe says to the contrary, in a certain sense, it's more than tzomeach. They are completely submerged in their source. They're constantly inside the water. But the Rebbe says the truth of the matter is, this itself is going to tell us the chidush that exists by tzomeach, by the plant life, more than fish. That is, because by fish we said they stay inside the source. The chidush by tzomeach is that even as they're growing out of the ground, out of their source, and especially trees that are growing quite tall, more than 3 tvachim, more than 10 tvachim, and some of them obviously very, very tall and high trees, they're still always connected with their roots that are in the ground, and through that, with the koyach hatzomeach, with the power, with the energy that's making things grow that's inside the ground. So that's point number one. Another point, says the Rebbe, by fish, every individual fish is not connected with his personal source of chayas, meaning to say he doesn't have to remain in that particular water. He could move from one body of water to another. He could even move from the river to the sea or the other way around. Again, as opposed to tzomeach, which always stays in his particular piece of earth where he's connected to. Says the Rebbe, within this itself, there's also an advantage within tzomeach itself, specifically to the trees, eitz hasada, even more than other plants. And that is, the Rebbe says, other plants, for example, when it comes to grain, or the fruits of the earth, etc., so they don't remain in existence, which is, as a plant connected to the ground, they don't remain from year to year. They lose their metzias. So they're only there for a limited amount of time. Whereas trees can produce fruit from one year to the next. They can tolerate all the differences, the different seasons of summer and winter, etc. And all of this does not stop their existence. They last through all of this, which shows on a tremendous and very strong connection with their source of their chayas, which is giving them specifically this tremendous power not to be nispal, not to be affected, not to be changed as a result of the different seasons, and they remain in existence and actually growing from one year to the next. Says the Rebbe is now going to apply this all by the human being, by the person. We know that a person is called an olam katan, like a miniature world. And just like in the big world, we have the 4 categories of doimim, tzomeach, chayim, medaber. Again, the inanimate, the plant life, the animals, and the human being. So too, within a person's ruchnius, and within a person's spiritual being, there's also these 4 ideas, these 4 categories. The Rebbe says it's known that the midos of the person, the emotional character traits of the person, these are the tzomeach, this is the plant life within the nefesh adam, within the soul of the person. Because in the emotion specifically, there's this idea of growth from small to big. In other words, a person could have a small emotion and then it grows. It balloons into something very, very big. The Rebbe contrasts this with Seichel. In Seichel, you don't only have the idea of something growing from a small little intellectual concept into something bigger, but there's also the idea of like the animal, which is expressed in the idea, the difference between the animal and one of the big differences between the animal and the plant. Again, we said the plant stays in one place, connected to its source, whereas the animal moves around from one place to another. Similarly, in Seichel, there could be changes going from one place to another, meaning it's not connected, it's not defined, it's not limited to one specific nature. The whole idea of Seichel is about understanding in an objective way, not the way I feel like understanding, not the way I want to understand, but rather trying to understand in an objective way how this thing really truly is. And in this way, the person in his mind is traveling, so to speak, changing. Sometimes he's seeing things in a way of chesed, sometimes it will be in a way of gevura. In one particular idea, the conclusion of the Seichel is going to be that in this particular way he has to look at it in a way of chesed, of kindness. In another way, it's going to be more of gevura, of restraint or severity, etc. In other words, so there's this constant movement within Seichel. Whereas in midos, on their own, they're very, very defined and very limited and very restricted and remaining in their nature the way they are. Meaning the midah of chesed is always remaining on its own, it's always going to remain chesed. And gevura is always going to remain in the mode of gevura. It's only, again, that they could grow from small to big. Again, this is similar to the idea of the plant that's always rooted in one place, is just growing from small to big. Says the Rebbe, just like we explained by the plants in the bigger world, that it's unique with the fact that it's constantly connected to the source. In a similar way, in this plant life, within the person, which are the midos, this is the advantage that it has over Seichel, which this idea, again, that it's specifically always connected to its source, to the pnimius of the nefesh of the person, which is the source of the midah, rooted deep inside the nefesh of the person. The Rebbe says, where do we see this? How is this expressed? This is the reason, says the Rebbe, that we see in regarding midas and regarding the emotions, they have a very, very strong, they're very strong, they're very intense, they have a lot of power. And it's very difficult to change their place from one to the other. In other words, it's difficult for a person to change himself, like we said about the tree, that usually doesn't move from one place to another. So for example, a person that's very, very kind by nature, it's going to be very difficult that he should suddenly become a person of gevura. And so to the other way around. The Rebbe points out that nevertheless it is possible, although it's not very usual regularly, it is possible that a person could overcome. He could take a seichel and with that to overcome and transform the nature of his midos and change his midos from bad to good, for example. Just like by a tree, it's also possible. It might take a lot of effort to uproot a tree and to replant it somewhere else. And then they're going to grow in this new place, and in sometimes it will be better and greater than in the original place. But again, generally the idea of midah is that it's very, very strongly rooted in its place, not really changing, and this is an expression really of that deep part of the nefesh that's so intense and so strong. Says the Rebbe, this itself is the reason why seichel is not really so defined by and connected to the nature of the person, as we see that a person could grasp things, could understand things, even that are contrary to his own nature. Because seichel, which is more like the chai or the animal life within the person, in a revealed way, it's not so strongly rooted to its source in the nefesh. Just like the animal in the big world, that's not constantly connected to its source. So if it's not connected to its source, so therefore it could move around more from one place to the other. It's dafka the midas that are so strongly connected to the nefesh that they're permanently fixed and they don't move. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand what the pasuk is saying. Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. That the idea of an adam is specifically the idea of eitz hasada, as we mentioned before, because it's specifically in the midos, specifically in the tzoymeach, that this is where you have in a revealed way the source, because it's always connected to the source. This is where you see the expression of the Pnimiyus HaNefesh of the person, of the inner nefesh of the person. Says the Rebbe, this is also why in Avodah, the main Avodah of the person is not so much in the area of Seichel, but primarily in refining and elevating his Midos. Because it's specifically by the fixing of the Midos and elevating the Midos, this is really touching the very, very deepest part of our Nefesh. And therefore, a person reaches his shleimus, his perfection is going to be specifically through this avodah dealing with his midos. To the extent that we say that even seichel, the shleimus, the ultimate perfection of seichel, is when it's going to impact midos. We say that what's supposed to be as a result of the knowledge of Hashem, when you take it to heart, when it impacts your midos. That's the ultimate, is when the midos are impacted and fixed. Says that, but this is also what the Gemara means when it says on ha'adam eitz hasada, that where is it expressed? Im talmid chacham hagunu mimenu toichal. What does it mean, hagun? That the talmid chacham is not only a smart person, he's not only learning Torah, he's not only the advantage of seichel, but that the seichel is impacting his midos, and that gets him to act in a way of hagun, and that in his midos he's acting in a proper way. And the Gemara says, if this is the kind of Talmud Chacham is, Toichal, from this Talmud Chacham you should, so to speak, eat, from him you should learn, from him you should receive. Because Ha'adam Eitz HaSadeh, that is, that when is a person, an Adam in the most perfect way from whom you could learn, when he is like this, when he is this Eitz HaSadeh, when he is that it's Seimeach, in other words, the tree aspect inside of him, the plant aspect inside of him, the Midas aspect inside of him are the way they're supposed to be. Says the Rebbe, just like it is by every individual, so too it's true regarding Klolos Am Yisrael, all of Am Yisrael as a whole. We know that all the Yidden come from the three Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And it's in a way that the Yidden are always connected to the Avos. As Rashi tells us on the Pasuk, Ki Meiroish Tzurim Erenu, Rashi says, this is Bilam saying, that I look at their beginning and the beginning of their roots, and I see that they're very strongly founded and strong based on and through the Avos and the Imois. So the Yidden are very strongly connected to the Avos and the Imois. Again, going back to this idea of being connected to the roots. But in which aspect, in which area do we see this specific idea of the connection of every Yidden to Avos? It's not so much in the inyan of Seichel, of intellect. It's specifically, again, in the inyan of Midos. It's known that the three Avos correspond to the three Midos of Ava, of love, Yira, awe and fear, Rachamim, compassion and mercy, which this is the general Midos, and this is what they gave over as an inheritance to their children forever, these Midos, so that, as explained in Chassidus, this is why we call only these three the Avos, because these Avodas of the Avos are constantly in every single Yid, at all times. In other words, we're always connected to specifically this Avodah, the Midos of the Avos. And the reason for this is because Yerusha, the idea of an inheritance, is about that bond that the one who's leaving the inheritance is connected in his very essence to the one who's getting the inheritance, to the Yoresh. And therefore, what the Avos are giving over to their children after them in a way of a Yerusha is not so much that level of Seichel and the idea of Hasagas Elikus, of grasping godliness. For example, Chassidus explains that the Darg of Avram is Seichel Hanela Mikol Rayin. He's a level of intellect that's completely hidden. It's beyond any sort of thought and logic, etc. Completely higher than Seichel. And that's the level of Avram Avinu's Darga. This is not something that we say automatically goes over to every Yid, because Seichel, in a revealed way, is not so much this idea of being connected to the essence which is given over in a Yerusha. Rather, only the idea of the Avodah and Midos, which is Ava, Yira, and Rachamim. Again, since the idea of the Teva, this is the idea of the Midos, which is connected to the Pnimiyus HaNefesh of the Avos. This is why this is also what's going over in a direct way, in a revealed way, to every single Yid, where we stand connected to this Avodah of the Avos. Says the Rebbe, one of the heroes that we could take out of this very, very simply is, we understand that the source of Chayas of every single Yid is Torah. Ki heim chayenu, Torah is our life. Nevertheless, practically, the Seder HaChaim of most people is set up according to Torah, that this idea of someone being occupied solely with Torah is only a small minority. Or generally we have the concept of Yoshvei Oil, those that sit in a settled way, in the tents of Torah, etc. So these are generally a minority of people, not like the fish that are constantly in their source of life, but rather most people are going out into the world. And it's over there that they need to carry out their mission of making a place for Hashem in the world. So we need to remember that Adam Eitz Hasada, that a Yid needs to be constantly connected to his source of life. That means the chayas in Torah and mitzvahs that he had received when he was in the tents of Torah, before it came the time of Lirdoif, which is the time when the person goes out into the world. That time that he was there before learning in Torah needs to remain with him constantly, so that he's always feeling that he's right now connected back to that time. That means the feeling has to be not as if something that once upon a time he learned in Cheder or Yeshiva. And he's remembering now what happened then and how he felt then, etc. But rather it has to be in a way that right now he's connected. He feels right now that time. He feels that that's his chayus right now. That's his energy. That's his life right now. And that's what his whole existence is all about. So that's on the one hand, the people that are not necessarily learning Torah all the time right now. On the other hand, the Yoshvei Oyel, those that do sit and learn Torah, need to know that learning Torah itself is not sufficient, because just with logic itself, we said in Seichel there could be all sorts of changes. There's no guarantee that even once he will leave the tents of Torah, he's going to remain connected properly to Torah. So it's only when the Torah is in a way, as we said, V'ashevoisa elev avecha, that it impacts also the feelings and the emotions of the person. Torah becomes engraved in the person then in a way that loisha nisi, that the person is not going to change, because it impacted every part of him. No matter in which situation he is, he should always remain connected to the source of Mayim Chaim, of the living waters, which is Torah and mitzvahs.